Well, I have 10:15, so we will begin our regular board meeting, Jamestown School Board meeting. I want to thank you, all the guests that have showed up today. I hope you take the time to fill in the form in the back so we can know who all has been here. If you please rise and join me with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First thing we cover is our school board norms, and I asked Aaron if he could do that for us.
The board developed norms are to share and respect varied opinions and speak with a united voice once a decision has been reached, to prudently prioritize resources in a student-centric manner that aligns with the district's strategic plan, to exhibit a mindset of continuous improvement through adequate preparation for meetings and a commitment to board education, and to commit to assessing board effectiveness to ensure high-quality governance for the staff, students, and community of Jamestown.
Thank you. At this point, item C is public communications, and this is where we give the public an opportunity to share anything they want within limits to the board, but I don't believe we have any public communications tonight. Any forms come in?
We will have a budget hearing starting at 6 o'clock, and that's a separate.
Right. Yeah, at 6 o'clock, we will be having our budget review hearings, which will be a special session, but we'll start that promptly at 6 p.m. tonight. And this is to the board members. We have a section for conflict of interest to see if anyone has a conflict on anything that's in the agenda for tonight. Okay. Well, then we'll move on to our consent agenda. This is where we have several items that we can approve at one time. Should any board member choose to pull one of the items off of that consent agenda to discuss separately, we can do that. So at this point, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. Moved by Gail, second by Aaron. Any discussion? Hearing none, we approve the motion to accept the consent agenda. Next item is our regular. Didn't we vote? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, like I said, y'all gonna fire me one of these days. Yeah, it's gonna happen. No. Regular agenda, we do have a great thing that is so exciting to do. We have recognition tonight for those who have 10 years of service, and that's always an exciting thing to see that we have people that have been in our district and performing a regular, excellent job to help us to get to where we are today. And we want to recognize them tonight. And as you come up, we'll call the names up one by one for those that are here. And we want you to stay up here because we are going to want to get a group picture before you all leave. And I've asked Jason to call off the names. And as your name is called, please come forward.
Thank you. Juanita Hertz. Bill Nelson. Jolyn Shoemaker. Heidi Flitton. Penny Gangler. Abigail Koropatnicki. Angie Wanzik. And Lynn Fossen.
Okay, I don't like that background. Come over by the flag, maybe, and over there. Better picture here. That's always an exciting part of our board meeting when we can recognize people. So thank you for your years of service. It's truly appreciated. Next item is correspondence. I haven't been notified of any correspondence. And reports. The first we have is Student Council, and Monica Ripplinger is going to come and share. Oh, and you're going to have to induce some of your gang that you brought with you.
Hi, I'm Monica Ripplinger. I am the Executive President of Student Council.
I'm Maddie Orr. I'm the Executive Vice President for Student Council.
I'm Addison Grieve, and I am the Executive Treasurer of the Student Council.
So we have started the year working with homecoming because that's our big thing. We have a committee for dance, the pep rally, the parade, and shirts. This year we are trying to do free homecoming shirts for all the staff and students at JHS. We've been asking businesses for donations to make that happen, and we are still working towards our goal of $2,900. We've also been doing hat days and dollar donuts at our school to fundraise for the shirts. And then our publicity team is working to get students more involved and going to more activities. So we've been trying to advertise like different sports and stuff that's going on that day. And then our other thing is the seniors are planning a class trip to Big Sky, Montana this year. So that's exciting. And that's pretty much it.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes?
Question?
Is your accountant on top of where you're at with your T-shirt goal? How short are we?
We're about halfway, and homecoming is next week.
And how can interested parties get a hold of you to contribute?
They can email olivia.shriok@k12.nd.us. Shriok is SCHRIOCK.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next is the superintendent's report. Dr. Leck.
Thank you. You have my written report. I'll go highlight a few different areas. First, the health and safety updates. We continue to provide reporting each week on our health and safety updates. We all know that we're still in the midst of a pandemic, and so it's still important that we continue to collect data, analyze that, and make recommendations as necessary. I am happy to say that numbers are decreasing, which we are happy about. The numbers of positives and those impacted by quarantine. It certainly has not gone away. It's still something that we need to continue to look at. But we had been seeing a slight but steady increase, and now that's taken a little dip. One of the areas that we do look at is there's wastewater testing that happens. That's a piece of information that I get every week. That has been consistent with our numbers as well, which is a good sign. I will say I still feel like we need to monitor that. We're still on a pathway that November could look like November last year, which is something we certainly don't hope to be the case, but it's the reality of where numbers still are trending. So we're happy to see decreased numbers, those that are impacted by positivity in their household or positive individually. And we're happy with leveling off, but we aren't out of the woods. It's something that we need to continue to monitor. So we keep collecting data every day. As I've stated many times, I report on those, or I should say I collect and analyze that data every day. We compile Monday, Wednesday, Friday, report on Friday. For those that are interested, that goes out on our district's website, and then it also goes out on our district listserv to staff. So we're certainly happy with the trends right now, but it is not over. I thought I would share information on the vaccine mandate that had a lot of press when I was writing my superintendent report, and I felt like we should have a conversation about how that may impact schools. And the reality is it depends on where you live. In some states, and about half of us, it makes a difference, and half of us it doesn't. So 26 schools, or 26 states, essentially through the Department of Labor, if you have an OSHA plan with the state, then you are required to, as a public school, to mandate vaccines. We are not. We don't have an OSHA plan, so that is not something that we are mandated to do. Interestingly, private schools do. If you have over the employment threshold, that is a mandated for private schools. In North Dakota public schools, it is not. It would be an individual school district's choice. And so I just figured I would pass that along, just in the event you have questions or if the public is questioning, what happens in schools. I will say that I'm really very pleased with the staff and the work that they've done to make sure that we have a safe and healthy school environment. We are continuing Binext rapid testing on an as-needed basis. That's been helpful, I think, for staff to have that opportunity. We're here as early as 7:30, and we can make a lot of different things work. Individuals just need to call central office if they need to have a test completed. So we've done a few of those. Again, it's as needed. We don't have a set time. We did do serial testing last year, but we haven't seen the need to do that as of yet, to provide serial testing, say, every Monday or whatever. The as needed seems to work just fine, but I'm glad that we have it.
Is there any cost associated?
So no costs associated to the district, no cost associated to the health insurance plan, no cost associated to the individual. It is a program we're participating in through the state. And so Amy, Leanna, myself might conduct different testing, depending on who's available. So people would just need to call central office. If they call Jane, Jane can get people to connected with whoever can do testing. We're here early enough so somebody, if they are symptomatic and they feel the need to get tested, they can get tested before school starts. Or we can do it, really whenever that happens. I am happy also to say, as I referenced before, we have a high number of vaccinations in our school district from staff. 68%, which is one of the highest in the state of North Dakota in public schools. So I think that's just a great example of the care that our staff takes to make sure that our environment is safe and healthy. Later on, we'll be talking about ESSER. If you've had a chance to look at that tracking spreadsheet, I think that is going to be a helpful document for you to help track the pathway. Thank you to Aaron, gave me an idea to include some charts in there that might help those that think differently than me. I'm a numbers-driven person. I like to see where numbers go, and I know others see a pathway a little bit different, and I think that's what this is about, is trying to be as transparent and communicative as possible. And so if we have a different way to look at that, I think what that shows is that other people can look at this document and help us track however it is that you need that information. So I think that's a helpful thing as well. But you've heard me talk about ESSER before, and I always use the same descriptive language. It's generational, and I think that's how we need to look at these dollars. They are generational, and hopefully we aren't going to ever see these kinds of programs again. Not that we don't want to see the additional support financially, but they're usually tied to something. We don't want to see a pandemic again that causes us to see this kind of these federal dollars again. We've talked before, we're targeting a huge portion of this, about 70% towards facilities. Now the applications themselves look different because we're claiming some existing expenses, and there's flow-throughs, and that's a lot of what those charts and the different spreadsheets help to understand, is the tracking of. So we're claiming in these areas, and what's the ultimate impact? It isn't on what we claim. We have counselors. We're going to have counselors, but we're claiming counselors. I'm just giving you an example. But when we claim those counselors, that means that there's an impact somewhere else down the line. And so we just wanted to make sure that we're understanding and tracking what that impact is. For example, health insurance. There was a $250,000 board-directed influx into the health insurance fund, which was very necessary. But where does that come from? That helps to determine the path. When we have 70% of our funds devoted to building and facilities, where is that general fund flow through? And that, again, those either whether you're looking at numbers and you want to see the pathway through the numbers, or if you want to see the pathway through the charts, either one is going to get you to the same place. But the biggest thing to understand about the outcome is the more that you spend in facilities, the less impact the general fund is going to see. So there's a give and a take. If the board decides facility projects, we only want to spend 60%, then that increase is going to be more in the general fund, and the other is true. If the board says, boy, we want to target 80%, which is the maximum you could target because you have 20% of learning loss. But if you wanted to say 80%, that just means that the general fund goes down that much more. But that's the pathway. But we're really looking at expenditures that impact the pandemic. So think of those as short-term expenditures, the things like we purchased more equipment to help with disinfecting, the Clorox 360s, for example. We had costs with masks and things of that nature. That's what I would consider that short-term pandemic expenditures. We mostly use ESSER 1 in that area. Our food service fund transfer, that was an ESSER 1 expense. Similar to the health insurance fund, we needed to influx because there was a direct correlation to the food service balance and the pandemic. So we infused that with some dollars. That was also ESSER 1. We did add some new programs and positions. Those were ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. I kind of consider those to be combined. So you won't see a differentiated between 2 and 3. I just lump them together for the most part. It happens by year, and you saw that in the spreadsheet as well, when we claim that. But those are programs. We added a high school counselor through 2024, mental health therapy services, which I'll talk about in just a little bit, the CTE expansion, and some professional development opportunities. Those all are in those ESSER 2, 3 new programs and positions. The building fund projects, as I talked about before, that's targeted right now at about 70%. Those are all funded through ESSER 2 and 3. The health insurance fund transfer, which I talked about, and then the impact of the general fund savings and the direct relationship that those have between the building fund expenses and that general fund impact. The other area that we need to consider is in the new programs and positions, those are temporary positions. So as a board, you need to start thinking about, and we as central office administrators need to start thinking about, which of these continue on beyond the funding. And that's in that spreadsheet again. You saw 2 different pathways. We either continue to fund programs or certain programs, or we discontinue. And so that's a conversation over the next few years that we're going to have to continue to come back to. Again, the example I'll use again is an additional counselor. We're going to have to make a decision after 2024 when this funding, generational funding, expires. Do we want to continue a 4th counselor, or are we going back to 3 FTE mental health people in that department? In the past, that was 2 counselors and a social worker. Right now, that's 3 counselors and this additional ESSER-funded position. So those are conversations we're going to have to continue to have. I did color code those expenses, and I tried to match the chart to those colors so you can see that pathway in the programs, again, just to try to be as transparent and communicative as possible. One of the areas, speaking of ESSER dollars and facilities in particular, construction approval request form, there'll be an approval that you'll need to make. I'll be asking you to make later on in this agenda. One of the areas that we were waiting on was architectural fees. Typically, those are in the 7 to 8% range, and that came out when we talked just recently with JLG to a little over $400,000. It's fairly consistent with what those costs should be. We did have our construction manager look at that amount, and he said he felt that that was consistent as well. Trapper Field and Erstead future considerations. We talked in the past, Joan Morris was here in July, talking about conditional support for lights at Trapper Field. That is not going to be a reality. There wasn't a support. We made that conditional based on funding from the park board. They don't have it in their budget to support that. Joan asked, and we started to have a conversation about, do we want to maybe consider that at Erstead Field? And so we're going to have some conversations internally with that, if that comes to fruition, and we'll bring that to the board to have a greater conversation about it. I just wanted to make you aware that Joan approached about looking at this, or looking at other alternatives. That kind of segued into a conversation about Erstead Field. We have had a lot of questions about that, if we're going to have lights in that facility or not. It currently isn't in our plan or in our budget, something we would need to add to the capital projects plan. But if we can find a way to fundraise that, at least a portion of that, is there an opportunity there? I think we should at least engage in the dialogue. But I wanted to make you aware that that is at least a discussion. Or am I missing something here? I did want to talk about, I skipped right over it. The mental health therapy services, I think that's gone well so far. So we've had some referrals already into that program. We'll have those counselors here on either Wednesday or Thursday, depending on the level of the building. We have the same individual, the same counselor supporting our elementary and middle school, and then a separate counselor supporting our high school students. And I'm very happy. Our counselors were great. We went from a planning meeting with the village right to starting referrals and making sure that that happened. I included a brochure and a question and answer document that I think is really pretty helpful to pass along. I can't speak enough about the program of the village. I think they've done a nice job getting this started, and I'm hopeful as far as what that this will prove to be an invaluable resource for our students and our families moving forward. But with that, I think I will stand for questions. Everything else is, I'll bring up with the NDSBA convention, the schedule's available. Make sure that if you are planning to participate, you talk with Amy right away. We do have a cost associated with every membership in the past, or every registration. They let us transfer some or back out of some, and they don't allow us to do that anymore. So if you sign up, we're getting charged. So just make sure that you are planning appropriately for that. So with that, I would stand for questions.
Any questions? Diane?
I too am excited about this partnership with Village Counseling. Just make sure I'm clear on this. The counselors that come in 3 times a week are from Village Counseling. They come over from Fargo, and if there are students that are not covered by their own health insurance, our ESSER 2-3 may be applied to that.
So no, yes and no. So there may be a misconception because the district is supporting this, that it is completely funded through the school, and that's not accurate. It still funds partially through insurance, Medicaid, whatever is appropriate. So we still file to insurance, and so think of it like a shared cost. It's a lot about opportunity and availability. We know that the therapists are not readily available in our community, so this is one. It addresses partially access, but we still start with insurance or some kind of supplementary support. If there is not supplementary support insurance, then we could use that bank of dollars that we put in, the $60,000. That funds those that can't afford on their own. We do not want to see students that don't have insurance not being served. We won't do that, but we have to start at the place of a shared cost. Because if we only use that $60,000, that will exhaust far quicker than we're able to service students. And so it's a shared cost. And then if there is hardship, those individuals should talk to the village, and we can start to have that conversation about how else we can support.
Any other questions? Aaron?
Yeah, just a comment on the lights at Erstead Field there. I guess I'm gonna, I'm a little sensitive to that, and I don't have a big appetite for absorbing additional costs. I was looking at the deficit spend that we were approved as a part of the preliminary budget. We're expecting that we're going to have some challenges this fiscal year. We're looking at a mill increase. I don't have a big appetite for bringing on additional expenses at this time.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? All right, thank you for your report. Item D is Board Education, contextual competence. Okay. And we have Mr. Cody Mickelson, who is going to come and give us a little presentation on this. Thank you, Corey.
Thank you for having me. My name is Cody Mickelson. I'm the German instructor at Jamestown High School and have been for 14 years, so the 10 years looked pretty good to me when I was standing back here earlier. In light of some of the slides that I have in the slideshow, it might be advantageous to open that on your own device because some of the writing is a bit small. You can always get to it later as well if that's your choice, but in case there's something you'd like me to make larger, I'll do my best, but not positive I can do much with that. So my goal today is to kind of tandem off of what Superintendent Baszler had addressed with the board earlier, if it was this month or late last month. And just to kind of tie those two things together, I had been, last Tuesday was my last day with one more coming up, I believe in November, of working on the curriculum content standards for the foreign language content standards. And those have been long overdue, and so you'll see here that those are from 2001. So I've got a fresh perspective on how that process works. And so I wanted to come today and give a little bit of insight on how the standard is used in the classroom, because those are not just thrown into the room and worked with. They require a lot of preparation and time with those. So I did take a couple slides from Superintendent Baszler's presentation just because she had done a good job. I decided not to reinvent the wheel. And the first line there, I think, does a good job of summarizing what the standard is for, and that the content standards are providing a common reference for learning among all the schools in the state that choose to use them. And it isn't a requirement necessarily that a school stick right to the content standard, but be at or above the content standard level. And so there is a little bit of discretion to be used depending on the circumstance of your program, whether it's an advanced placement course or something to that effect. And then on the next slide, with the purpose of the standard, establishing guidance for local school districts, local curriculum development. And so that's where what teachers do steps in, and that's what we spend quite a bit of time on in the PLC process. We'll get to working with some of those things. So that did a nice job of setting things up. Now, if you ever have some free time, and I know you're just loaded with it like I am, right? There is a page here that has all of the North Dakota content standards on it, and it has the year in which they were last approved. And so you'll see that those range roughly in the 5-year span. 5 to 7 years, I believe, is what Superintendent Baszler said. And we're very fortunate that the foreign language content standards, which will, in the draft, are called the Indigenous and World Language Standards, will have a 2021 mark on there. So rather than being the oldest, we'll be the newest. So we'll get to be top of the bill fairly soon. And just from that process alone, I just wanted to just step aside and say the amount of dedication that DPI has toward making these standards come from educators is really incredible into the aspect of they don't want to be part of the conversation in the room. They simply want to facilitate what's happening. And so they really have a really good set of, I call them cop-out questions at some point, but they get you thinking and making you answer your own questions when you really just want someone to answer it for you. So these standards are all from the educators in our state, which I think is fantastic. So I have there's the small writing I was talking about. These are just some examples of standards, and if you went through that list on the previous slide, you would notice that there's just not two set of content areas that look exactly the same. And so this is a math standard, and I just randomly picked one, so I wasn't favoring any grade over the other. I think I just played roulette on the slides. And math had a content standard and then a practice standard section. So if you were looking for what gets taught as the standard, that'd be on the left, and then how it gets taught, there were some practices over there. And I don't want to say how it was taught because they don't prescribe how you teach in the classroom, but they do want good practices to be part of learning math. So they do have a separate outline for that. And they're very clear that it's not curriculum in their forward. This was a English standard that I took out of their standards, and theirs were more grade level focused. And they did have different areas of focus on there, so I won't go into delving into that, but you can certainly see how specific they they get at the standard level. And then of course, I had to plug the new Indigenous and World Language standards because I wanted to show that, like the music standards and some of, I think, the fine arts standards and Phi-Ed standards, the movement has been to go to the proficiency scale of, and in foreign language, it's novice, intermediate, and advanced, of how well do you know this, and then the way that you demonstrate that can vary. And so this was just one of them. These are in draft form, but they are out on the website. And coincidentally, if anybody wants to be on the review panel, they're looking for people, but I won't plug anymore. So I put this slide in here because I think a lot of times this is the easy answer to a hard question on what is curriculum. And as the previous slides had stated, that standards provide statements of what students are expected to know and be able to do within a content at a specific grade level. Some areas don't prescribe grade level because, like a foreign language, for example, or a music, you might have upper and lower, you might have beginning and end, and you might not have a particular grade level that your content is assigned to. But as that's the intention of the standards, and so as such, standards are not the curriculum and textbooks are not. So those are just supporting tools that are analyzed, and we'll see a little bit like how often those are analyzed and what kind of things go into selection of those materials. So bridging the gap between the standards and student achievement, and I hope you have the same slideshow as me. I see some puzzled looks. Okay, good, because I had two going at the same time. So, the curriculum, I think the most touching thing that I got out of doing some of the presentation preparation for this was that reminding myself that the curriculum that we use in our classrooms is a reflection of what we know about our students and how they learn and what they'll best respond to. So there are some things that might have worked really well 5, 10, 15 years ago, and it's just not the right tool anymore. Or the tool needs to be modified, or it needs to be propped up with another tool. And so those are the types of things that, as educators, we look for to make sure that we have the right support, even in our own classroom, for ourselves and for our students. So the last comment there, that curriculum being the roadmap to measuring student achievement. The goal is always to be able to measure achievement. And we had numerous conversations at our curriculum writing or content standards writing that how is this measurable? How would we measure what we're expecting a student to be able to do? And there are all kinds of really great, like prolific things you want your students to be able to do, but it's not easy to measure it and quantify it when you're trying to be creative. And so that's where the curriculum part comes in, and then that's where, you know, being on a content revision board is one thing, but putting this into play at the classroom level is quite the feat as well. So I wish I had an infographic that could just summarize everything, and this would be, you know, a 1-minute conversation. I think this one does probably one of the better jobs of the ones that I had seen, in that content standards just surround everything that happens in the classroom. It isn't what happens in the classroom, but it is what we're trying to achieve, what we're trying to measure, and what we're trying to get at with our instruction in the class. So student learning, always right in the middle, that's always the focus. So if you're looking for the bullseye, there it is. And then all of those supporting rings on the outside. If you do get a chance to look into some of those standards, one thing that is very clear in some of them, is that standards are absolutely not an instruction on how to teach in your classroom. And there were some moments when even we were dealing with standards at the state level that we thought were too prescriptive, that we thought the practice really shouldn't be what the standard is. It shouldn't be necessarily how it's taught. It really should be what is taught. And so always having to reorient yourself into that mindset is, it's hard at that level, but it's so appreciated at the classroom level. Being able to say, I can still teach this in a way that I think I can be effective with, because you certainly don't necessarily want people teaching in a way that's ineffective for either their personality or their class or their students. And so that helps. And the hard part about it is it changes all the time too. So every year you've got a new set of, you know, you have a map, but it seems like the roads aren't the right ones anymore. So the second sentence, and probably the most impertinent one, it would say districts are empowered with the freedom to select the best resources and learning activities. A lot of the materials that are used in classrooms now, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with having adopted an LMS and being able to pull things in from just about everywhere, are things that educators are supplementing their own curriculum with, which has always been something that's been done, but it's much maybe more, it's much quicker now when you can pull something in, digitize it, and add it right to what you're already doing, rather than having to wait for either a magazine to come in the mail or something like that. This is another graphic I really enjoyed because it was it cut the lines pretty clear, I thought. So, and I will say up front that this is not from a North Dakota perspective. It's just from a general generic perspective. But as a state standard guiding everything in the middle, the curriculum selection is what is chosen by the local governing board, which either would be at the school board level or would be at the school level, however that gets chosen in their district. So if their standard is to describe in the depth of a character setting, event, story, or drama, drawing on specific details in a text, that's all fun to read, but how is that going to get done in the classroom? Well, the chosen material or resource for that is listed in the center, and that you certainly could apply to any content area. And then finally, the lesson plan is where boots on the ground in the classroom would be what delivery method that the student sees. So really, the student is probably pretty isolated from the standard. There's always a learning target, there's always a goal, you can always state it, but much like all of us in this room, and maybe hard to say, but we probably don't all like reading that. It's probably not the most exciting thing, and much for their sake, keeping learning relevant and interesting is also something that has to be done. I only put this graphic in here because of hexagon number 3, and it kind of ties into the next slide, so I'll read it here, but the hexagon is review current curriculum and what we currently have, and this is a process that sometimes is painful because there are things that I like teaching and they're fun to teach, but maybe that's not the thing I should be teaching. Maybe I need to be moving on. And so having those sacred cows in your classroom, really, you can only have so many of those before you running a livestock barn. And so the hexagon there says, what should we keep, revise, or toss? And I think toss is, it's hard to do, but once you get good at tossing the right stuff, you really feel pretty good about what you're left with. And then the other thing about that is I don't want to say a yearly process because I think it happens more often than that, but you really are looking at that regularly and saying, what should we keep, what should we revise, and what should we toss? And I think every Wednesday that's what a lot of us are talking about. Okay, this didn't work. I have the data to say this wasn't the right thing, or I have the data to say this was a great thing, or let's make this tweak. And you'll see on the next few slides that those selections are made by some data-driven decisions and evidence-based decisions in the classroom. And I don't think that anybody would disagree when I say you're not going to find it all in one place. You aren't going to buy any one material that solves all your problems. And if they find it, let me know. I'm happy to revise my slideshow. Pulling up on the tail end, wanted to bring up PLC and how that can be a tool in which we find how robust our curriculum is and what we do with it. And so these are just 4 questions that we look at PLC every week, our professional learning community on Wednesday mornings. And so the first being, what do we want all students to know and be able to do? And it might seem simple to say, well, let's just look at the standards. I want them to know all of that. If you read all the standards, there are a lot of them, and there isn't a lot of time. And so prioritizing those standards is ultimately what we set out to do first, and then going through the other questions about how would we measure that, what kind of data are we collecting, and what kind of resources are we using to help support that learning in the classroom. I'm not going to go through this slide because I already did that with you, but it's certainly there if you want. So, well, I tried to keep it brief, and I hope I was able to do that because I know you have something at 6, and I won't profess to be the expert on this. I would take any questions that you might have.
Any questions? Yes, Gail.
Thank you, Cody. That was very good. I would also just add something that I found in what I did as a school counselor is oftentimes, too, we will crosswalk with other things. Like there was a lot of carryover between North Dakota school counseling standards and our health. And we didn't think it was important that kids had to get them from both of us. So sometimes there is kind of that crosswalk where you make sure that can happen, too.
Yeah, and
especially if you're in certain fields.
Yeah, some of those lend themselves more closely to others, but with PLC, the interdisciplinary component of it would be that you can team up and get in more of those priority standards that you may have if two areas have the same priority.
Intersect, yeah.
So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Heidi.
I just want to tell Cody thank you. I know you're involved at the state level, and I know it takes extra time, but it's great to have our district represented at some of the state level things also that you work on with standards.
Yeah, it's, when Superintendent Baszler talked to us at the beginning, she said that there'll be moments where you need to leave the room because you're just so mad at everybody. And I didn't get to that point, but I definitely can see how it would happen.
So Cody, I do have a question too. When she was here, she talked about the standards, and she talked about a period of time when those standards they're made and they're put out. And there was a time frame. Was that like 5 years once the standard is out, or?
I want to say 5 to 7 years.
Okay.
I know the state had recently switched from consulting with McCrell. I don't know how recent that is, but they used to do an outside firm that would consult, and now they bring groups of educators in, and they have peer review groups from the state do a lot of that work. So I think it takes a little bit longer, but I think that the future revisions will be better in that case. There are others, and I'll use foreign language for example. We actually did meet in 2013, so we were still way beyond the 5 to 7 years. However, the reason that was put off, well, the number of reasons it was put off was primarily because we were waiting for the World Readiness Standards to be nationally finalized, and that didn't happen until sometime in 2013. And so while there is still a lag time there that is a little bit of we're curious about, it's nice to be done with it. And fortunately, you saw those numbers are much more current than, or they will all be current as of November. So.
Right. So just in my mind, to kind of summarize, I mean, these standards come out, but then you take, and when you develop the curriculum to follow up on that, you not only look at what the standard is, you have the curriculum, but then you also look at your individual students, you look at your individual classrooms, and kind of tailor it to fit the need.
Right, and there's a finite line of demarcation between what happens at the state level and what we do here. So we really, at the local level, see the standard, and then we analyze all further from there, and you stated it well, but just to draw that line between what happens in Bismarck and what happens here.
Very good. Any other questions? Very good. Well, thank you for coming, Cody. We
Thanks for your
appreciate
time.
your information.
Same time, 2 weeks? No.
Well, at this time, it is, I have 5:59, so I think we'll look at changing our approach and go into the budget hearing, and Dr. Luck has a few things he would like to bring out regarding that.
Thank you. I'm going to connect here as well as we're waiting. And we'll project. So you've had a board memo that outlines the process. It is Board Memo 79. It provides the budget approval process, these hearing requirements, an outline of the request, the impacts of the funding model and the request, and then a review of the current JPS financial situation. So I will take 5-10 minutes and review this memo, and I'll show you that I'll project up the ESSER document that I was talking about before, and we'll project that out as well. So from an approval standpoint, your options, you are required by North Dakota Century Code to have a budget hearing annually, and that is what this is. If patrons are here and wish for an opportunity to speak, you need to allow them to do that. Typically, boards have given 3 to 5 minutes of time for comments during that period. In terms of, I felt it was important to, with the budget approval process, you can either make that decision to approve September 20th, today, or you can make that decision to push that until October 4th, which is our next board meeting. You do have to have a budget. You're required by October 10th to have that decision finalized before October 10th. So again, that opportunity would be either to approve the budget that's presented today, or if there is greater discourse that you need to have, you could push that off, give us direction as central office. Differently, we could present the budget on October 4th as well. Historically, I always think it's important that we look back at not only what the current request is and impact is, but also what the historical implications are. for the tax increase, or I should say the tax impact, if there is an increase, and what that increase looked like in the past. So I do create a mill calculation worksheet every year, and that's linked on here. And I will just take you to that example here if people. So if I were to look at this, we had our previous tax year, our present tax year, and that's estimated. We know that this is not finalized yet. Even though we have to prepare a budget that's approved on October 10th, we know that valuation changes over the next couple of months. So this is the estimate that we have as of today. These are the mills we levied last year, got to 100. The proposed mill levy that you approved in the preliminary budget in July had 102 mills, the difference being in special assessments, as we've talked about in the past. The special assessments are provided to us. We can levy based on that impact. We can't levy more. So that is the impact that the district has for special assessments, and that is the only increase that is being proposed. Oftentimes when we get the questions, it relates to an apples-to-apples comparison. What does that mean for me as an individual taxpayer, a property owner? I use $100,000, like many do, as kind of that gold standard comparison because it's easy to compare. On a $100,000 home, based on this valuation change, or based on this mill levy change, the impact last year on the school portion of property tax was $450 on that $100,000 home. This would represent a $9 increase, so $459 on that $100,000 home. And I'll make the point, as I do in the memo, that this does not include any assessment change. If your home or your property was reassessed, this is an apples-to-apples comparison, same taxable value from year to year. You're assessed on the higher, or your assessed taxes on the higher assessment, or on the higher valuation if your home or your property has been reassessed. So on that $100,000 home, that impact is $9 from $450 of your school, on the school portion of your property tax, to $459. And anybody can take a look if they want to look at that worksheet. That's linked to this board memo as well. And you can take a look at that and see what the impact may or may not be on other changes, if you were so inclined. The historical piece of this that I think is important is that we look at, and sometimes we have a tendency to look at last year, and last year is the benchmark, and the only benchmark that we consider, what happened last year versus what happened this year. I include this every year because I think it's important. As we've seen changes in our state funding formula, we've seen changes in our local taxation caps. In the past, those were much higher, and you can see that represented in our total levy in 2008, 2009. As being 236 mills. We're talking now about 102 mills. So in 2008-9, that levy was $236, or 236.4 mills, on a substantially greater portion of your taxes were on that $100,000 home represented in 2008, 2009. The legislature wisely took a greater level of ownership in funding education. We're very appreciative to our legislators to making a greater commitment at the state level. Of course, that did mean that there's a shift, and we went from 180 mills down to 70 mills that are capped in our general fund to levy. And we certainly are appreciative of the additional funding from the state, but that does mean there's less levy authority, and that's represented in here as well. But as you can see, we've been pretty static since 2018-19 at 100. And as I referenced earlier, the additional 2 mills are specifically represented or referenced to the special assessment. Those have increased from 1 to 3 mills, and those are the dollars that were being assessed for various projects. We can't talk any longer about what we tax locally without recognizing how that interlinks to our state funding formula as well. I won't talk about this a lot because as a board you've heard me say this before, but I will reference a piece of this at state funding. There's a presentation here that you can link to as well if you want to learn more about the state funding formula and how That all interlinks with our local funding. And you can also see our state payment worksheet from September 21. I will say, though, that this continues to be work in progress until November. Once November comes, then this worksheet becomes more finalized. You'll see changes from August all the way through November somewhat, but you'll get the point as you look at the payment worksheet. And I don't think you can understand, and again, as a board, you've heard me have this conversation before, but you can't talk about the state funding formula without understanding adequacy and equity. If you consider what adequacy is, adequacy in terms of school funding is the base level of financial support that allows the school district to provide a high level quality of education. That is adequacy. So the funding formula itself is built to provide an adequate education for every student, inclusive of state and local funding. That inclusive of state and local funding is important, and I'll talk about that in a bit, but that's a piece that we need to recognize. Equity is the other piece that we need to understand, and that's because the reason equity is embedded into our formula is because not every school is created equally. We know that there are schools in the West, for example, that have different funding revenue streams than schools in the East. Some have high levels of financial impact for businesses and commercial properties, things of that nature, that others don't have. Some are very small, some are very large. All schools are different. And so what equity provides, equity measures provide, is an ability to make sure that each school can get to that adequate level of funding. And again, that looks different in every school. Every level of financial support is different. That $10,136, that state payment for students, that's not what we get from the state. That's what the state decides is necessary to provide an adequate education to all kids, inclusive of state and local revenue. So that state is a big piece of it, but we do not get $10,136 per kid. We have some deductions, and those deductions are equity strategies. They're ways that the state takes a little bit from everybody and redistributes. And I think these are really important that we understand, because we assume we get $10,136 per weighted student unit, and we just don't. Because, as I go through in greater detail in this presentation that I won't go through in this presentation, but the $10,136 we deduct. We make some deductions there. And we talked about 102 mills, that's the proposed. The state funding formula actually is going to deduct 60 mills of that 102 mills that we levy. That's deducted from our state formula, and that's the equity strategies at work. They work, they do exactly what they're supposed to. But that 60 mills, so almost 60%, is not dollars that we receive from, those are dollars that are deducted from the state, okay? We also have other, in lieu of taxes, things like oil and gas tax, coal conversion, tuition. Those are deducted as well. That's a much smaller amount. But if you put that $10,136, the equivalent of our 60 mil deduction is $1,864 per weighted student unit, so per student. And the in lieu of tax is $129 per weighted student unit. So actually what we get from the state when you consider those deductions is $8,143, because the rest of that is deducted from our state aid payment. It's not deducted directly from us. We don't write a check to the state. It's deducted from that designation from the state for our adequate education. So our portion of providing an adequate education is that is the $1,864 plus the $129. The state's commitment to that adequate education is $8,143. So I bring that up because each year when we approve levies, we assume, well, schools get $10,136 per kid, and we don't. It's a shared commitment. And I want to make sure that we recognize that those 60 mills are deducted in Jamestown, as they are in every school district, because that's part of how the formula works. I referenced that a little bit more later on, and I can certainly answer questions if there are any related to some of these definitions. Sometimes we talk in education language. And that's not what everybody understands. And so I did include some terms and definitions as well that people can follow along if they want to look a little bit at greater detail about some of my presentation or some of the things that we're having conversations with at this meeting. So the impact, and this is somewhat where I wanted to focus on a little bit, is there's a give and a take. And we're certainly appreciative, as I said before, of the state taking on a greater level of responsibility, even if it's not the full 10,136 that people assume. But they still took on a much greater commitment, and we're appreciative of that. What happens, the downside of the state taking on more and lowering our levy authority means that we're more reliant than ever on what the state does provide. And in this past cycle, legislative cycle, they were able to give a 1% increase in both years. So about $100 and then, $100 and $101 the next year per weighted student unit. So that isn't a substantial increase. We're already at caps for levy authority, so we're somewhat hamstrung as a school district on where we can go from a revenue generation side. And in the funding formula, the way it is, enrollment really is a significant factor. If you are decreasing in enrollment, that's a big hill to overcome. And if you're seeing a decline in enrollment in a year in which you're not seeing a significant increase to the per pupil amount, that becomes a double whammy. So it's just something that we need to continue to monitor in the years in which we've been a little spoiled. The legislature has been able to provide some pretty nice increases for us, which has allowed us to do some nice things in our district. That isn't always going to be the case. And so we have to be prepared for years and cycles like this when we have 1%, or a couple cycles ago when we had 0%. And if you've followed with what I was talking about with the deductions, a 0% is not a hold harmless. If we see a 0% or sometimes even a 1% increase, that's not necessarily an increase in our bottom line as a school district. Depending on your enrollment, depending on your deductions, that might actually be a decrease to you. If you remember when we had 0% and 0% a couple of years ago, that actually equated to, in terms of state funding, about a $330,000 loss in the first year of the biennium, and about $150,000 or $175,000 in the next year of that biennium. So 0-0 does not mean the same. It doesn't mean hold harmless. It means that the funding formula amount stayed the same, but your deductions and your enrollment change that actually made us go down pretty substantially in our state funding. So now what we know is we're at 100 mills, 102 mills proposed, 60 of those being deducted to support the state funding formula. And so we know that there's very limited opportunities to change. We do know that there are areas in which you could increase. In the tuition levy, for example, is an area the board could make a choice to increase. There has not been an appetite. I have not made that recommendation in the past. There hasn't been an appetite among the board, but that is an option. Tuition is one area that you could shift. You could go to the public and say, boy, we'd want to increase our general fund authority. The community could give you the opportunity to do that. There has not been an appetite for that at the board level, at my level, but that is an option that you have. The board could come out to the community and say, we want to enhance our building fund. The board has had an appetite for that, and the community has not. And so that has not been an area that is open to the board. But we are at cap limits for the general fund, the miscellaneous, and now our building fund at 10 mills. So the short-term help is represented here, and I referenced this earlier. This is where we started with ESSER 1, 2, and 3. We talked in May about a budget. We reached out to the community in a survey and said, if we have these dollars to spend, what's the input from the community perspective on how we need to spend those dollars in the community? We had 333, I think, respondents provide that feedback to us. And we morphed quite a bit from here, which was kind of a general idea, into this. So I do want to go through this a little bit and just so we understand how the different ESSER applications have impacted our district in the right now, but also how they're going to impact our district moving forward. This is what I was referencing earlier. It might be easier for you to look at this in terms of numbers and see how numbers track in individual years. You might need to look at this first to see what the pathways are. They're just here again to try to be as transparent and clear as possible. So if you look at our ESSER 1 application, those are devoted to pandemic expenditures and general fund flow through. So we had those, think about it this way, the short-term expenses we had related to the pandemic are essentially embedded into the ESSER 1 application, about half of it. That goes into the pandemic expenditures, things like technology that we use to transfer to a one-to-one initiative, the equity provision, the stipends we had to allow for our private school to access ESSER, that was only a part of ESSER 1. Now they have their own called the EANS, but ESSER 1, we had a requirement to do that. And then the food service fund transfer that I referenced earlier. So that's the pathway for ESSER 1 for half of it. The other half goes into what I call a general fund flow through. Those are existing staff, existing expenses that we have that we are going to impact the district right now and in the future. So that's the yellow area is the general fund flow through, and you'll see that that's represented in ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 as well. So ESSER 2 flows in, and ESSER 3 both flow into general fund flow through, and then as I referenced earlier, some of those new programs and positions. So when you look at ESSER 2 and 3, which as you can see represents a pretty significant chunk of dollars, $7.3 million. So we have to think about these generational dollars and how they impact the right now, but how they impact us moving forward. And so when we make those claims for existing staff, existing expenses, things like summer school, extended contracts, how does that, where are we going to target those dollars moving forward? As I stated earlier, about 70% of that, or at least right now, 70% of that has been proposed for facilities. So some of the savings or the flow through the general fund would flow directly into the building fund. And you'll see that represented in the budget that Sally will present later as well. So the building fund, that is driven by the capital projects plan, another board approved plan. The facilities committee meets and will be meeting again in the near future to finalize projects for the summer of 2022. And those dollars would then be targeted. We would make a transfer from the general fund into the building fund. The building fund would make those expenses. As we reference, and Sally will reference later, we make that general fund transfer when we know we are going to spend dollars. Because as soon as general fund money becomes transferred into building fund, it becomes building fund. And then subject to the limitations of the building fund. So you're not going to make a transfer. You don't want to make a transfer. I wouldn't recommend that you make a transfer until you're going to utilize those funds. You also have an impact for anything that you do not spend in the building fund is going to impact your general fund. We know that that we add a 1% increase. We know that there is a need to have an interim balance. There's arrows here to kind of designate that the more you spend in the building fund, the less there's going to be impact to the general fund and vice versa. If you decide to spend less in the building fund, there'll be more in the general fund to impact later down the line. That could impact the new programs and new programs and positions that we're going to have to consider once we get past the September of 2024. Do we want to continue, for example, having 4 counselors? Do we want to continue therapy services for students? Or are we going to discontinue those? Those should all be interrelated to this conversation right here. How much do we spend in the building fund, and how much do we impact the long-term general fund? So if you want to see that broken down in dollars and claims, you can see we've broken down ESSER 1, ESSER 2 application, the ESSER 3 application. I'm going to make a comment to some of the new programs and positions that we have here, that we do have in ESSER, which is our largest allocation at $5 million. We do have a responsibility, as the board is well aware, to devote 20% of that to what the state calls learning loss. That's a really broad interpretation. We think of learning loss specifically about instruction, or what's happening in instruction for students that have missed class, potentially for the pandemic. It is a much broader application than that. It means how are you going to provide programs and services to students to build on their knowledge, to build on existing programming. That can include all of these areas. So when we devote dollars to learning loss, that includes at least part of the commitment to mental health therapy services through the village. That's the additional counselor. That's summer school that we're providing, and we're currently providing. That's yellow, that's a flow through, but it counts as learning loss. We have included the special ed technician positions that we've more shifted staff to, rather than they aren't new staff. They're shifted staff, but those count under learning loss as well, as does our contract with Central Valley Health to provide nursing services. So we'll claim all of those through ESSER 2 or ESSER 3, depending on the service. And we have devoted some of ESSER 2 to learning loss already. That is recommended but not required. So ESSER has a 20% requirement, ESSER 3 at 20% requirement. ESSER 2 only has a recommendation. So they did want some of it to be included in learning loss. I'm sure we could have fought that and said, no, we're not going to provide anything, but it did make sense to, as you can see, the services that were being provided to either claim them in ESSER 2 or ESSER 3. But those are the requirements that we have. The total impact, if you look at the color coding again, in terms of pandemic expenditures, that's a little less than $250,000 over the course of our 3 ESSER programs. The food service transfer was $110,000. New programs is a little over $1.1 million. The flow through to support capital projects, right now that's $5.1 million. Again, that could increase or decrease based on facility committee recommendations and final board actions on facility plans. You've already moved dollars from ESSER to support the health insurance fund at $250,000, and then the difference in all of that is $375,000 that support the general fund to fund those future programs moving forward. So again, this number is going to change. This number could also change, but those are some of the flexibility that we have, or based on the decisions that the board makes as well. So the other question comes down to, well, how are we accountable to these dollars and what's the process? So this is a pathway that we put together for what does that look like, the ESSER 1, 2, and 3 applications. We have quarterly reports and quarterly claims for reimbursement. We don't get that money up front. It's done as a reimbursement. So we have to expend dollars before we can receive them. So we make that reimbursement. I see that I have a spelling, I'm missing a T in instruction here. But they make that reimbursement to us based on our allowable expenses. And then we bring forward budget revisions back to the board, and then we start the cycle again. And so as changes occur potentially here, that's going to cause us to create a budget revision and slightly reallocate those funds based on what's available and what those priorities are. But in a 10,000-foot view, it's close to these dollars here. You'll just make minor changes. We change different staff, or you make a different change in your facility plan. And then the learning loss provision again. And then I also put in the dates for ESSER 1, 2, and 3. They all have different end dates. They all had different start dates. Well, actually, the starts all go back to March 13th, 2020, but they were initiated on different dates. So with that, I will stand for questions or any need for clarification. I think I already took more time than I was planning to. But hopefully this was a helpful document for board, but also for the public to look at and see how are we choosing to spend those ESSER dollars. And then again, the reference back here to the board memo that outlines what the historical impact has been from the school district, how we compare from a benchmark standpoint to the district, that calculator, that mill calculation worksheet, and the impact right now is $9 on a $100,000 home based on that special assessment mill increase of 2 mills. So with that, I'd stand for other questions.
Any questions, comments? Aaron?
Just on the duration of that special assessment, is that a single year or is it a multi-year assessment?
So they give us an assessment every year. The levy exists for a year, but they're all on different cycles of repayment, but they give us that assessment each year. We assess it at this meeting or in our budget every year.
Any other questions or comments? I just had one regarding the use of the funds and the timelines. How does it work if we have not, let's say, I mean, we show the allocation, but we've not spent the funds prior to that date? How does that fit in?
We can't ask for reimbursement until we expend it.
Okay.
So as an example, if we have greater building fund expenses than we have reimbursement, we might need to make a short-term general fund transfer into the building fund to cover that difference. Gap financing, there might be other strategies that you could use, but that would be, you might be sending general fund dollars into the building fund and then recapturing those dollars in the next budget cycle.
Because we don't know how long it's going to take for that reimbursement to come, or do we?
No, we would know in that year. If you look back to, no, I lost where it was. But each of those years has, in the yellow flow-through, we target 21, 22 for our 10 FTE counselors. So after we expend those funds, we can ask the state to reimburse them.
Okay.
But if it's happening in a future plan year, we wouldn't be able to until we expend them.
Till we expend. All right. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, at this time, do we open it up for? Yeah. If there are any public comments at this point that anyone wants to raise, we are open to that right now. Jason.
On that note, however, now might be a good time to let the public know to contact central office if they'd like any of this information. Is it on our website, though, or don't we have this? Do we put any of this on the JPS website?
We don't have some of these documents, but if people would want to email me and get any of what I have shared, I'd be happy to do that. It's all public record. They can just contact Robert.Leck at k12.nd.us or call 252-1950 and be happy to send that information out to anybody that needs it. I would suggest, that the budget hearing memo that I outlined has links to everything else, so that's probably the easiest document if people are interested.
Anyone else? Now, our plan is to wait until October.
It's up for them to decide.
Yeah, I mean,
I provided the.
So the question is, do we approve it today, approve the budget today? I included in the memo either today or
right.
October 4th, just because I didn't know if there was comments or discussion that led you to take a different path than what's been proposed and preliminarily approved. You certainly are able to approve the budgets today, and I know Sally's going to go through those in greater detail whenever we get to that in the agenda. But you would have that ability to wait until October 4th if you felt like you needed more time. That answer your question?
Yep. Sally?
My question, all right, Greg, are you going to go back up to the buildings?
Oh,
Are we going
okay.
to start there first?
Okay, so we'll stop and we'll just come back to this when we come back to it in the agenda. So now we'll move back up to item E, which is any old business. Seeing none, item F under new business, item 1, activities. I don't believe you have any information there. Item 2 is building and grounds. Item A, the approval to submit construction request form. That's information had been sent out earlier, and in the superintendent's report, he discussed that a little bit, and so we would be open to a motion in that regard. Okay, motion by Gail. Is there a second? Second by Diane to approve the, to submit the construction request form. Any discussion?
Comment on that?
Yes.
If I can just comment, I did write this in my report as well. With the school construction approval form, this is required by the state of North Dakota and North Dakota Century Code that if we do certain amounts of improvements or add square footage, we need to get Department of Public Instruction approval. So what I'm suggesting here is we don't have all of our finalized plans from the Facilities Committee and our Capital Projects Plan, but this can take a while sometimes. The construction approval process can take a while. And so I created that construction approval request form based on what the Capital Projects Plan outlines currently. If there are significant changes, we could always revise that plan and send it back to the state. Submitting it now allows us to get in the queue. It gets the form on the desk for approval, so we're not waiting. You can't break ground until this form is approved, so we want to accelerate how quickly they get to it. They don't have any problems with getting revisions if we need them, but that's the reason why it's here before we've approved a new capital projects plan.
Okay. Any further questions or comments? Due to the significant nature of this, I would like to have us do a roll call vote, if you could, Sally.
Melissa Gleason? Diane Hansen? Heidi Larson? Jason Rohr?
Yes.
Gail Nelson? Dan Tweeten? Aaron Roberts?
Yes.
Greg Allen?
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0.
Okay. So the motion passes. Thank you. Item 3, curriculum assessment and instruction. I don't believe we have any additional information there. Under item 4, finance, general fund balance. That's just for information for you to review. Item B is approval of the monthly financial report. Is there a motion? Motion by Diane. Second by Jason. Motion and the seconds to approve the monthly financial reports. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We went through the public hearing, which is still open now, but item D is approval of the final 2021-22 budget. Do we have a motion? Motion by Aaron. Second by Jason. And this is to approve the final 2021-22 budget. Any discussion?
You want me to talk about it?
That's what Sally has her fun, is going through the 100s to, what is it, 700s or 600s? 900s. I wouldn't want you to miss that.
Heaven forbid. Do you want me to go line by line on each budget? I'll go to the executive summary. All the detail of all the budgets is there, but what I will do is highlight the changes from July until now. But first of all, the board, with Dr. Luck's direction, I think with the ESSER funding, because there was a lot of ways to slice this pie, is doing a great job of utilizing every one of these generational dollars like Dr. Luck talks about. I just think it's great. using existing dollars, paying for counselors, tech staff, additional, contracts, saving those general fund dollars to be able to utilize, and not, just straightforward and using ESSER dollars, because as Dr. Luck presented earlier in a couple meetings ago, that's a more increased cost because of having to pay federal dollars. Bacon-Davis, there's just a lot more rules and regs, so there's a lot of ways to cut this pie, but I think it's, a great plan. Okay, having said that, so presenting, all of those salary dollars were already in the draft budget. In the executive summary, what I have modified in the general fund budget, I'm just going to talk about that. All those counselors, tech staff were already in the draft budget presented in July. In the ESSER dollars, Dr. Luck has proposed a professional development project for $50,000. So that was added into the salary and benefits portion of the budget. And obviously, Dr. Luck talked about the village for mental health services. So that line item has been added to the final budget in the 300 categories. And then the remainder of it is in fund transfers, transferring that $250,000 one-time general fund money over to the health insurance is in the budget. And then $500,000 if the grant is approved for the match for the CTC expansion. That fund transfer to CTC is in that transfer or in the 900s, which is a fund transfer to another fund. And then transferring the balance of the excess balance, which is all that savings, over into the building fund. But as we go through the year and we see how the projects and everything that facility committee determines, will determine that amount, okay? So that's in a nutshell the changes from the draft budget that we presented in July to this final budget that we're presenting to you now. In the revenue side, when I did the draft budget in July, I estimated a 3% increase in the mill levy, okay? And right now, that's, as Dr. Luck talked about, we only have the information that we can go by. So originally it was 78, one mill was 78,262, $78,262. Currently it's at $78,079, so it's just a little bit less. So the revenue has been adjusted to reflect that. When you approve in the resolution for the mill levy, we have to do actual dollars. And so what, you will see that the actual dollars is higher than the 78,000 just to assure that we get whatever the mill levy, if it ends up increasing in the next 2 or 3 months, we always project a little bit higher revenue so that we get the maximum amount of dollars projected. They will always give us, they will give us the value of, for the building fund, 10 mil, for the value of the general fund, 70 mil. But if we would say, okay, the dollar, they always go by the dollar value, so it's kind of confusing. So we just put that dollar value a little bit higher so that, to ensure that we are assured that, the full value of whatever the mill is. The other thing in the revenue, obviously with the ESSER projects, now it's, as Dr. Luck talked about, it is a reimbursable. So each quarterly, I do reports to the state. They get every single invoice. We do a report, send all the invoices to, and then we get reimbursed. So what's projected in the budget is what we're projecting in expenditures for this fiscal year. So that's the 1.36005925 that's added in the budget, okay? Along with the carryover of, which was already in the preliminary budget, the carryover of the ESSER 1 money, and that was projected in the draft budget of $213,000, okay? So, we don't put the whole thing in there because it's reimbursable, so you'll see next year, the carryover and the actual projection of ESSER 2.3 for the next fiscal year. So it's reimbursable. It's a little bit different, but that's, that's how the state is doing it. It's reimbursable. So we have to incur, like Dr. Lex said earlier, we have to incur those expenditures, and then we get the money. So that is the general fund. Obviously, the building fund budget change to reflect that transfer of the 2.3 million over into the revenue side. That was the change in the building fund. The food service need equipment. Joe Oster knew he was trying to save some money and not budget anything in equipment, but also always things are older, and he said, I probably made a mistake there. So adding $13,000 in equipment for food service equipment, and also adding revenue, the special revenue that the state, that Dr. Luck talked about, I think it was at the last board meeting. So adjusting the budget to reflect that $14,000 revenue that will be coming into the food service. The rest, the health insurance budget, obviously revised to add that revenue of the $250,000 one-time payment, adjusting that. And the Career Tech Center, some budget adjustments category-wise, and adding, the some of the activity fund money in there that wasn't in the budget, minor amounts to accurately reflect the correct amounts. Okay, that's all I have.
Any questions? Aaron?
Yeah. In regards to the that $500,000 for the career and technology, would we be expecting a budget revision when we secure the grant match and the JDC dollars as well?
So I would not suggest a budget revision would be necessary, because you already have the 500,000 transfer in the budget. That is the commitment of the district, is the 500,000, so I wouldn't see that change. The amount may change in terms of what CTE has to spend, because there's the potentially the JSDC if that's approved, that match grant, or that side of the match, and then the district's portion. So it's really about a $1.3 million set of projects, but the district's commitment wouldn't change from 500. Because I think
It wouldn't be a flow to the district that would show up as a budget expenditure for the full 1.3?
No, what you would see in the, are you saying in the general fund budget? Maybe I'm just not understanding your question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we have the $500,000 for transfer, and then there's a grant match and JSDC dollars associated with that. Will that show up in any of the budget books for any of the line items at a later date once those are coming in?
Okay. Yeah, I understand your question. If the grant is, if we're successful in the grant, we would need to see a budget revision that reflected additional revenue that came in and additional expenditures, but we can't do that when we don't know what, if we've received that grant or not. But the district's commitment of 500,000 wouldn't change. I was just not understanding which fund you were talking about, but okay.
Any other questions or comments? After listening to Sally.
I think Sally does that.
Go ahead.
Aaron, if I understand your question, the 500,000 is in our budget because it's an ESSER projection, so that's correct. So we would be prepared to issue a check to CTC, and you would see budget, if they get approved for that grant, you would see budget revisions on CTC side.
After listening to Sally, it clarifies some things on the question I asked before, and we talked about the reimbursement. My question is, so we submit for the reimbursement, but what happens, is there a chance that we might request reimbursement because our expenditures did not go to the amount that we projected? know what I'm saying? Because we're asking for reimbursement, and what if our expenditures or our costs for the teachers or whatever we're doing?
It is
here-
exactly what we spent. So, I mean, because what I have to do is print out and send every single solitary invoice, details from the payroll. So we have spent this money, so we don't get anything that has not been spent.
Okay.
So that's why I showed the last slide that I showed was that constant cycle of reimbursement, or quarterly report, reimbursement, board revision, budget revision, and then it goes back to reimbursement. So if for example, we had projected a certain dollar amount for counselors in that 10 FTE counselors, and it's slightly more or less than that, we would have to do a budget revision in one of those cycles to recapture whatever that little amount that we were off is. We've seen the big rocks. We know what the big rocks are. But to get down to the penny, you're going to have to do budget revisions in that cycle. If you don't, we project what negotiations are going to tell us 3 years or 2 years down the road, and we project what the special ed technician position is going to cost the district, over a span of 3 years. Those are things we just don't know. We have to estimate. But we'll do revisions as it comes. The match grant is a good example of that. Things change between now and September 2024, even if we have the big rocks identified. But to be able to maximize the dollar, every dollar and every penny, we're going to have to do slight budget revisions as it comes along to capture all those dollars.
Yep, I understand. Any other questions, comments? Sally?
Yeah, just to confirm what Dr. Lex said, so we know what everybody's salaries are. Somebody could be out for an extended amount of time, and their salary is deducted, so it's not exactly, what happened here, but it's, like I said, exactly what we spend is what we get reimbursed.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with this being another, I believe, critical move for our board, could we have a roll call, please?
Heidi Larson. Yes. Jason Rohr.
Yes.
Gail Nelson. Yes. Dan Tweeten.
Yes.
Aaron Roberts.
Yes.
Greg Allen.
Yes.
Melissa Gleason. Yes. And Diane Hansen. Yes. Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you. Item E is approval of the 2021 resolution for tax levies, and that information you've been able to review prior to this point. Do you need to add anything there? Okay. Then I would entertain a motion for the approval of the 2021-22 resolution for tax levies. Moved by Aaron, seconded by Jason. Well, I heard you made a noise over there. Any discussion? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Under personnel, item A is approval to add career liaison position to level 4 of non-certified wage scale for 2021-22 school year. Yes, please.
Just a comment, just for clarification, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Level 4 of non-certified wage scale doesn't have a career liaison position. The recommendation I have is that's a grant-funded position, a temporary position, so it would only be included on level 4 of non-certified wage schedule for this school year, because that's when funds exist to support it.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. What?
I interrupted you. I think I confused you. We need a motion in a second.
Process of getting a motion. I'll make the motion.
People. Okay, so we have a motion by Heidi, second by Jason. Any further discussion? Dr. Lecht, anything?
I prefer to interrupt you when you're in mid-thought. So
Okay, hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Thank you, motion carries. Item B is approval to hire Patrick Slosher as the special ed technician at the high school at a salary of $44,760.17 for the 21-22 school year. Motion by Melissa, second by Diane. Second by Gail. You got that? Gail. I'm just making sure you're on your toes over there. So. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to hire Patrick Slosher as the special ed tech at the high school at the salary of $44,760.17, and this is for 21-22 school year. Any further discussion? Rob?
Just a comment, this is a certified person. We made that determination before. That is also an MOU that's included in the superintendent's report. And this would be 44,706 prorated on days worked. That's the representation of the full year salary, just so we can make that notation of it's for days worked.
Okay. Any other comment? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 6, policy and procedure. Item A is approval of the first reading of policy GACE, the GED credit for high school graduation and curriculum requirements. Motion by Jason, second by Gail. The motion and the second is to approve the first reading. Of course, we'll have another reading of the GED credit for high school graduation and curriculum requirements. Are there any discussions? Gail.
I just have one question. If we do that, would that get rid of the sometimes, not get rid of isn't the right word, but sometimes we've been penaltied when kids graduate with a GED, so if they use this option, will it reflect in a higher graduation rate for us is, I guess, my question. If I could have got any more unwordy there, I don't know.
The easy answer is yes. It would provide greater opportunities for students to stay on track for graduation. I think it's a great opportunity. I know that our now this isn't adult ed. It's separate from adult ed, but it does allow a pathway or a better pathway to keep kids on track for graduation. We know one of the major dropout indicators is when students find out that they can't graduate with their peers. We know that that's a big piece, and in any way that we can get to keep students on that pathway, the more likely we are to have them. So indirectly, yes, I mean, it's going to have an impact on graduation rates.
This has been long overdue. You know, back in my school counseling days, I always felt that was something very unfairly that we got dinged for when life dealt a kid a circumstance where he may have had to finish with a GED for any number of reasons, and yet to have that counted dropout with, yeah, that was not ever fair. So thank you, legislators, thank you.
Yeah, and actually ESSA does that as well. In our state plan, we can count those GED students, and that doesn't count against us in that particular, in what you're talking, that particular report. So ESSA's already done that for us, but this is just a pathway for more kids to stay on track.
Okay. As was mentioned, the motion to second is to approve the first reading of this credit for high school graduation and curriculum requirements. See, that's a great thing. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item B is approval of the first reading of policy ABAC, virtual learning because of weather or other conditions. Is there a motion? Motion, Melissa. Second, Aaron. Any discussion? Hearing none, the motion and the second is to approve this policy, ABAC, virtual learning because of weather or other conditions. All in favor of the motion say aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item C, a revision of policy FFD, carrying weapons. Do we have a motion? Motion by Aaron. Second by Dan. And this motion is second is to approve the policy FFD, carrying weapons. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item D, approval of the first reading of policy DEAG, weapons. Is there a motion? Motion by Diane. Second by Aaron. The motion and the second is to approve a policy, I didn't highlight the right one. Approve policy DEAG, weapons. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Opposed, same sign, motion carries. And we got a lot of weapons things going on tonight.
Can I just comment on that a
Sure.
little bit? In the past, we've had policy only as related to weapons for students, and that was a direct
Yeah.
result of expulsions and, required federal requirements for that. As different laws have changed in the state of North Dakota related to teachers and conceal and carry, things like that, schools have had to respond with having policies that are broader to different stakeholder groups as opposed to just students. So that's where some of this comes from.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion and a second, excuse me. Item C, approval of the first reading of policy KADA, weapons. Oh, prohibited on school property. Is there a motion? Motion by Gail, second by Heidi. The motion and the second is to approve the weapons prohibited, prohibition. I'm getting better on school property. And this one actually relates to the public. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item F is approval of the first reading of the meetings of the board. Is there a motion? Policy BC. Moved by Melissa. Second by Heidi. The motion and the second is to approve the, it's the board meeting policy BC. Any discussion? Aaron?
So this one is, I don't know, I think it's fairly benign, but is this just a policy that we didn't have in place before and we just, okay.
Okay. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item G, approval of the first reading of policy IAC, lease of school property. Do we have a motion? So moved. Okay, I'm gonna give it to Jason first this time, and the second to Aaron. This motion and second is to approve the first reading of policy IEC, which refers to the lease of school property. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Thank you. Motion passes. Item H, approval of the first reading of policy IAD, which is the disposal of school real estate. Motion by Melissa, second by Gail. And this motion and second refers to the disposal of school real estate, policy IAD. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Item I, approval to rescind policy DCAD, expense reimbursement. Motion by Aaron. Second by Jason. Motion and second is to rescind the policy DCAD, expense reimbursement. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Then, as a subsection to that, approval of the first reading of policy DCAD, expense reimbursement. Motion by Aaron, second by Dan. Motion and second is the first reading of DCAD, expense reimbursement. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item J, is this for information? Review of policy HCAA-D, purchase laws for school. Does this take action?
So traditionally, we have included for a review an exhibit. This is just the corresponding exhibit to policy HCAA. So yes, you approve. We traditionally have approved those, but
Okay,
it doesn't state action on there, but traditionally you have approved an exhibit.
yes, okay. So do we have a motion to approve exhibit HCAA-F relating to the purchasing laws for schools? Yes. Moved by Gail. Second by Heidi. We have a motion and a second to approve the policy exhibit HCAA-F, purchase laws for school. Any discussion? Heidi?
Just to clarify, this policy itself is staying the same. We're just making an adjustment to an
Just an
exhibit
exhibit,
based on legislation or whatever may have changed. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Item 7, tuitions. Item A is approval of a tuition agreement for pre-K and kindergarten students to attend Montpelier Public School for the 2021-22 school year. We have a motion by Melissa. Second by Aaron. Motion and second is to approve this tuition agreement for pre-K and a kindergarten student to attend Montpelier 2021-22 school year. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item B, approval of a tuition agreement for a kindergartner and a sixth grade student to attend Montpelier Public School for the 21-22 school year. Motion by Melissa. Second by Aaron. And this motion and second is to approve this kindergarten and sixth grader to attend Montpelier for 2021-22. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item C, approval of a tuition agreement for a seventh grade student to attend Montpelier Public School for 2021-22 school year. Motion by Jason, second by Dan. This motion is second is, of course, to approve the seventh grader to attend Montpelier Public School for 2021-22. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Item 8 under other A, approval to submit the LEA annual compliance report. Do we have a motion? Motion by Gail. Second by Melissa. Gail, you don't have to say your name. I know your name. I know I messed it up once. But that's on me. I'm sorry. Thank you for helping me out. I do have a question. Does everyone understand what the LEA report is? Do you want to comment?
Yeah, I did reference in my report, each school in the district are required to check off. It's part of the accreditation process. In the past, pre this process, we wouldn't get approval and accreditation all the way until May. So we operated in the school year, and basically they shifted that into assurances. And so now each school reviews these assurances. They report that they are in compliance. That gets submitted through the STARS reporting system. And then the school district is responsible to have board approval on the LEA, which is essentially the culmination of all of these.
Right.
So that's why I include the school reports along with the scan of what I'll approve, or I'll send in tomorrow, if it's approved. Assuming.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second to approve to submit the LEA annual compliance report. Any discussion? Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Individual school compliance reports there for information. If you have any items for future agenda, feel free to email or call or write and let us know. We'll get them on the agenda. The meetings to be scheduled, we have the new school board member orientation meeting Monday, October 4th at 4 p.m. at the district office. Item B is the school board regular meeting, which will be October 4th at 5:15 here in the Thompson Community Room. Item C is the Health Insurance Committee meeting Monday, October 8th, and that's at 3:45 in the multipurpose room at the middle school. And item D is the North Dakota School Boards Association Conference, which is October 28th and 29th. And of course, you know, the 28th is the law conference, the 29th is the regular conference for the year. And I believe that Amy needs to know that by October 1st. Okay, so please, if you're planning to attend, let her know so she can get the room for that night and get everyone set up. These have always been very valuable, especially the law. I get so much out of that one, and the rest of the seminars that you can attend are also beneficial, and getting to meet new people. And for those that are new on the board, it's a requirement to go. I'm not saying any names, Dan. Item 6 is the evaluation. And again, if you do hit that link, it's not working, you can go back and paste it into your browser, and you can go to it. And remember to right-click on the adjournment. With that, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much.